Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever this finds you. I'm Danny Harris. I'm so honored to be the Executive Director of Transportation Alternatives and to welcome you to the 10th Annual Vision Zero Cities Conference, which also happens to be TA's 50th anniversary. So this is a really wonderful opportunity to come and celebrate the work that we're doing in this organization here and really what we're learning from all of you and how we can continue to advance Vision Zero all around the country and around the world. We'll have so many exciting opportunities to gather together virtually in person on bikes, walking around over the next few days. And I can't imagine a better way to kick off the conversation than really looking at how we're going to get rid of our highways. These were obviously things that were built for a variety of purposes, and they have created so much damage and destruction in communities. And it's an exciting opportunity to reimagine what those could be and how actually they could start to stitch communities back together. So without further ado, I'm really excited to pass it over to Will Toor, who's going to be facilitating this morning, and he will be leading an exciting conversation with a group with an esteemed panel who he will introduce you to. So without further ado, I introduce you to Will, and just a big thank you for joining us for Vision Zero Cities.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Will Toor. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office, where we've also been engaged on a lot of transportation issues over the years, and really excited about this conversation. I think we're all familiar with those highways that have divided neighborhoods and really hurt local communities, and so interesting to see the movements around the country for removing those highways or stopping new highway expansions in urban areas. And we have, I think, a really wonderful panel here today, folks who have really interesting experience with working on those issues in their communities. So the way that we're going to structure this is each panelist will take about 10 minutes to do an introduction. Then I'm going to ask some questions and we'll be open to audience questions also. And so our three panelists will be Dorothy Wiley with Allendale Strong, Shawn Dunwoody with Hinged Neighbors out of Rochester, and Miriam Schoenfield with Rethink 35 from Austin. Before we move to the panelist presentations, I'm going to just take a few minutes to describe some of what's been happening in Colorado, which I think is kind of an interesting and somewhat different case study. The only other state that I'm aware of that's sort of moving in the same direction right now is Minnesota. Colorado has really approached this issue through our climate and air quality planning, and the state adopted climate goals of getting to net zero by 2050 and cutting pollution in half by 2030. Very quickly, it became clear that transportation was the largest single source of climate pollution in the state, and that while transportation electrification was an important part of solving that we also needed to start rethinking how we were doing transportation planning. And so in 2021, our State Department of Transportation, through its Transportation Commission, adopted a transportation greenhouse gas pollution standard that required metro areas, the metropolitan planning organizations that are responsible for a lot of decision making around road and transportation projects, to project and measure the greenhouse gas emissions associated with their plans. And they were essentially given a budget. You had to show that the greenhouse gas emissions were not going to exceed that budget. And if they did, you had to revise the plans either by changing the projects or investing in mitigation. And we now have a little bit of experience with how it's playing out in practice. We've had two metro plans that have come through that process, one in the Denver area and one north of Denver. The one north of Denver didn't actually change very much, but the one in the Denver area was pretty transformative. In order to achieve the targets, the metro area shifted just under $1 billion out of highway expansion projects into bus rapid transit and bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And notably, there for many years had been plans to expand one of our interstate highways through central Denver. So I-25, the big north-south highway that goes all the way from, Wyoming to New Mexico and goes right through Denver. And years before, there was an expansion in part of the city where they dug a giant trench and did a very large expansion that took about 4 years to fill back up to the same levels of congestion it had been prior to the construction. But there was a lot of momentum beyond just continuing to move north and expand that highway. But when they did the modeling, it was clear that that was going to induce more travel. The rule did require the planners to include induced demand in their modeling. And so it showed all of the extra traffic and extra pollution that would come along. And they ended up yanking it from the plan. So sort of that's sort of our first round of experience was how the new rules working out. And it seems to be pretty meaningful. We were then very excited to see that just in this last legislative session, Minnesota, I think partially learning from that example in Colorado, has just adopted essentially that same approach into law. So I think there's some interesting opportunities to think about these highway expansion issues in the context of state climate planning, in addition to sort of where a lot of the action is really happening in the sort of on-the-ground fights and debates in different communities. But with that, I will turn it over to Dorothy.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Dorothy Wiley. I'll just give you just a little brief introduction of how I got to be a freeway fighter. I've lived in a couple of places, and not knowing that what I experienced would bring me to the place where I am today. I lived in New Orleans for a while, where the Claiborne Interstate, I used to live in the Treme, so that interstate was there. And it was just at one time a place lined with green trees, and now they want that freeway to come down. I also lived in Portland, Oregon, where gentrification came in, where they wanted to extend the freeway where my parents lived, but gentrification set in. So I guess I could say God was preparing me to be a freeway fighter, because I am fighting against that. I'm here in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I got here by way of Hurricane Katrina. So I am going to start. I am an Allendale Strong member and founder, and I live in the neighborhood of Allendale. So Allendale Strong was formed in February of 2012 when our Northwest Louisiana Council of Government, also known as NLCOG, which that term I'll be using a lot, wants to build a destructive and expensive freeway at the cost of $900 million at 3.5 miles. And it's called the I-49 Intercity Connector, that wants to come through our low-income African-American community. So we became a learning doing community so that we could better understand what these cut-through freeways do, or what we call ours is a zombie freeway, because this freeway was killed, but it has resurrected itself again. So Allendale Strong members, they work together so that we can renew our community relationally, economically, and environmentally. And we have also advocated for separating through traffic from local business traffic. And the alternative would to build a business boulevard at $60 million opposed to $900 million, and then use the existing loop. We have a loop, Highway 3132, that connects I-49 South to I-49 North, which is north of I-220, which connects all the interstates in our city. Allendale Strong has also convened a statewide learning doing community known as the Four Corners Coalition that also deals with the issues of the I-49 inner city connector. And these cities include New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Natchitoches, Monroe, and Shreveport. And what we do, we work together to reform transportation planning on a local, state, and national level. And this was started in 2021. Also, Allendale Strong has played a role in forming a national learning doing network of freeway fighters to reform transportation policies and practices. And this also was started in 2021. Allendale Strong would like to work to form a citizen-led street design team. And with this team, we would promote walking, biking, bus lanes, and wider sidewalks. Now, with the streets, we can build residence, community, and wealth safely by reducing the speed 10 to 15 miles per hour. And we also can have roads at 70 miles per hour, which are place connecting, where vehicles can connect to places quickly and safely. Then there is a place, a strode. A strode is when you combine a street where people interact with businesses, community, and wealth building. It gets combined with a high-speed road between productive places, and the speed is more than 20 miles per hour, but less than 70 miles per hour. So Allendale Strong would like to engage citizens in working together to shift the paradigm in how we design streets. Instead of vehicle-first transportation system, we would like to see people-first transportation system. And this is where we can participate with the Louisiana Four Corners Coalition in unstroding Louisiana cities. The threat of the freeway is worse than the build of the freeway because it causes unjust sequence of neighborhood decline. The area that I live in Allendale, we're in phase 1. So the I-49 inner city connector, it has caused redlining, population loss of over 29,000 people have been displaced since 1950. Businesses left, schools closed, crime increased, and we became a food apartheid or a food desert. And in phase 2, where we aren't, but this proposed I-49 inner city connector wants to come, it will also cause land values to be lowered. It will cause loss of home ownership, more decline because of being built adjacent to a freeway. Also, there will be health toxicity. Living within 1,500 feet of a freeway causes preterm labor, asthma, heart disease, and the list goes on and on. So it would be outward migration because with this highway 3132, which we call the loop, they want to build outside of the loop. So that is causing inner city decline, the growth Ponzi scheme, and then just well-being drops. So here we see NL Cox travel demand modeling for future employment input. And what it says is that we will benefit economically from the I-49 inner city connector. The red dots represent job losses in Shreveport, and the blue dots are where jobs are leaving, and they are leaving Shreveport. We have worked with a consultant, Norm Marshall of Smart Mobility, and he says this is nonsensical. So these dots have to be fixed. Okay, here we are with NLCOG's regional transportation planning that works against Shreveport Citizens Master Plan. In the red, this is NLCOG, our Northwest Louisiana Council of Government. And what they're saying in this first slide is that, hey, let's make Shreveport bigger by growing outside of the loop. And citizens are saying, no, let's make Shreveport better. Let's grow inside the loop. On the next slide, it is talking about NLCOG wants to increase vehicle miles traveled, induce consumption, increase pollution and public health costs. But the citizens say, no, let's reduce vehicle miles traveled and increase time with family and friends in healthier places. NLCOG has a $30 billion backlog of unfunded maintenance. 15 billion of those dollars are just a backlog of maintenance, and the other 15 billion is from mega projects like this one. But our citizens want funded maintenance, beautiful and well-functioning city. Here, NLCOG says, hey, shift traffic to freeways to run over Black homes, congestion, induce demand, and land loss. Citizens say, what about multimodal pedestrian, transit, bike preferences? NLCOG says, drive faster and farther. Citizens say, pedestrian preference, safe wealth-building streets. NLCOG says non-local ownership. Citizens want local ownership. And NLCOG says they're looking at the past, the grandfather's future, what they want, more driving, more interstates, more fuel usage. But the citizens say, what about our children's desires for today? Walkable, bikeable neighborhoods for healthy living. So which do you agree with? Do you agree with the past or our local citizens of today? I would like for us to build Shreveport, a city we all can be proud of, that we will serve all humans, not just those with automobiles. Allendale Strong would like to work together by prioritizing the city master plan aspirational values over NLCOG's transportation aspirational values. So let's reconnect transportation planning to land use planning and engage citizens in meaningful learning, doing opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Let's now go to Shawn.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Thank you very much for that, Will, and thank you so much for that, Dorothy, and appreciate understanding more of that. I am too. My organization, Hinge, is actually a freeway freedom fighter as well. But we are actually on a education and advocacy with neighbors and residents. Now, here in New York State, we're a little bit different. In particular, here in Rochester, New York, we have also a loop around us as well. We call it the moat. There's a big highway that circles our downtown, which you have revealed, Dorothy, what that does to a community, redlining, economic devalue, everything else that falls apart from that. But in the past 20 years, we've been moving forward to remove our highway. And in 2017, we did remove a quarter of our highway, the Inner Loop East, which connects us to 490 Interstate. So we were able to take that out and reclaim over 4.5 acres of land, which then we built housing on, medium to low income housing, affordable housing, and market rate housing. Also, retail was restored to what was a sunken highway. Our loop went underground. And so when that movement happened, our city officials were very excited about it, but didn't understand what it would do. Initially, I'd like to say it was a nervous moment because what would happen when you remove the highway? Will people come downtown? Will there be a reconnection? Will it reconnect communities? And to everyone's surprise, it did. It took 7 years of literally filling a hole with dirt in order to create the stability to bring it up to grade and reconnect communities in that part of the neighborhood. But some of the things that we realized, my group Hinge, we came up with the name, my partner Suzanne Mayer and I, is because we both physically live on opposite sides of this loop. And we wanted to hinge our neighbors together, to swing them together in this inner loop. And we realized the first phase was fantastic. They got it done. But we realized that there wasn't much community input, once again, because folks didn't understand what that would actually be. So much of the community input, which you're pushing for, Dorothy, to have people move forward, to have their say, and how their streets are designed and how things happen, really wasn't there. So we worked together with communities along the next phase of the inner loop that is going to be filled. We did get the go-ahead to fill in the other half of our inner loop, which is actually going to return 24 plus acres of land back to the city of Rochester. And so we've been advocating with neighbors, with the city, and with state governments to really consider racial equity, environmental equity. How do we think about developments of neighborhoods? So now it's not just a transportation project of let's fill in a moat or a sunken highway. It's about how do we literally reconnect communities and rebuild neighborhoods and create stable neighborhoods, those that had been physically removed and pulled out of the ground, those that have a fear of being gentrified or displaced. And this is really in the conversation of this highway removal. We've done our initial feasibility study on can this be done? And once that was published, we worked with our community and our neighbors to infuse ourselves in this document. We learned earlier on, just as most of you are doing across the country, you're understanding we learned there are 3 ways of doing this. There's the process, there's the plan, and then there's implementation. And in most cases, people want you engaged in the plan, but things have already been considered at this point. So you want to be at the very beginning when you can disrupt the process, disrupt how it's done, disrupt how communication goes out, disrupt how they're thinking about how things can be done. That in turn affects the plan. So when people go back to the plan, they're like, oh yeah, we've gotten input initially here that helped shape this plan. So now we can actually build based off of the plan that the people had input in. And that's what we were able to do with Hinge Neighbors and get our communities at the table, expressing that let's not just bring this sunken highway up to grade and follow the same path, but let's turn this 12-lane highway into a 2-lane highway and return back to the grid that was originally there in the neighborhood, go back to the grid. And in that process of doing that, that in turn affected the plan. And now we're going to return once again 26 acres of land back to the city of Rochester with green spaces in mind already, with the grid connected, all this from community input, thinking about social equity, racial equity, and economic equity. And this has been a great thing that we're seeing across the state. And we've actually been able to connect with our neighbors in Buffalo, New York. They're looking at removing their skyway. That's going into play. Syracuse is looking into taking down I-81. Even in New York, they're looking to take down the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. So we've got a lot of movement forward in New York State, and it's been a great movement. And so Rochester has been one of those key cities that people have been looking at to see what happens and how do you remove a highway and how do you create genuine reconnected neighborhoods, listening to your populations of people, not just small pockets, to create something that is equitable, that benefits the future of all residents and strengthens a city once again. So I'm done. I'll pass it over.
Thank you, Shawn. let's go to Miriam.
Hi, thanks everybody. My name is Miriam Schoenfield. I'm with Rethink 35 from Austin, Texas. Just going to quickly share my screen here. Okay. So Rethink 35 is a group that started really because we have a giant highway expansion planned here in Texas. This is on the left here is I-35, a highway that runs straight through the center of town. It's terrible, and the state wants to make it worse by making it even bigger. So this photo you may have seen, this is the Katy Freeway in Houston, Texas. It's the widest freeway in the world. I-35 would come close if TxDOT has their way. The Katy Freeway is also famous as one of the paradigm examples of induced demand. So when this freeway was expanded in Houston, commute times increased by about 40 to 55%. So traffic got much worse. So anyway, so a lot of people in Austin are familiar with this freeway because it's our neighboring freeway, and this is kind of what we're trying to prevent. This is the nightmare. So Rethink 35 has advocated for a study of alternatives to expansion, and one idea that we think should be studied is we've already got this highway. It's called SH-130, and it goes around the city instead of right through the city. It already exists. You wouldn't need to build anything else. And if this was redesignated as the interstate, that would be a much more appropriate route, in our opinion, for interstate traffic to be driving around the city instead of right through the city. And then that would allow the road through the city to be a proper urban boulevard. So something that might look something like this, where you've got lanes for cars, but also other ways of getting around. And you have things like businesses and affordable housing and all kinds of other wonderful things. So this is one of the proposals we think that should be studied. We submitted this study to the Texas Department of Transportation. They said, nah, not interested. And that was basically it. I'll say a little bit more about where we are with all that. But before doing so, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends in Austin, Reconnect Austin. They're another group that has been advocating against this expansion of the highway and for a better project. They put forward a proposal many years ago that involved burying the highway and putting something nice on top, something more like a boulevard. TxDOT looked at that and also was like, nah. And so that's one of the other alternatives that we think should be studied and hasn't been. Okay, so here is where we're at now. TxDOT was not interested in studying the alternatives that were put forward by the community, and in August they released what they're calling the final environmental impact statement. They're saying this is it. This is what we're going to build, and it's a huge and horrible expanded plan. So we've got some good news and some less good news. The good news is that there has been an incredible movement in the community forming against this expansion. So we've got, students on college campuses organizing protests. Parents have come together. They created a film about the impacts on children's health from the highway. There's been a lot of more engagement from our local officials and city councils. So the local movement opposing this highway is growing, and that has been invaluable. We're actually starting to see a real shift in the public narrative around all of this. But I want to, at this point, say a little bit about the challenges that we are facing. So the first thing I want to mention that is, we live in Texas. The state of Texas wants to build highways. The governor has made it pretty clear that that's the point. Build more roads, build more lanes, build more highways. Another challenge that we face here in Texas is what's called the MOU, or the Memorandum of Understanding. So Texas basically is made an agreement with the federal government that says that they get to do their own environmental review. They get to grade their own homework. So they put forward this horrible environmentally destructive project, and then they look at it and say, does this look good to us? Yes. And then they can move forward. Okay. So there's a handful of states in the US that have this agreement with the federal government. And what that means is that it is difficult for us to get federal intervention. It's not impossible, but the federal government has to kind of take a step back because of this memorandum of understanding. And one of the things that we're trying to do now is work on basically making sure that this memorandum of understanding either doesn't get renewed or that it gets significantly changed. Okay, so what do you do? What do you do as a community if this giant monstrosity is being proposed in a state like Texas, where there is this MOU with the federal government? How do you fight back? So one avenue is legal action. So Rethink 35 with some other groups, there was already one lawsuit and we're about to start another lawsuit. So there are things you can do, but this is a difficult route because the federal laws surrounding these kinds of projects are quite weak and watery. So showing that there's been a violation of federal law is not impossible, but it is challenging. And I will say that in Houston, there's another freeway fight going on, and the federal government did intervene there because of allegations of a civil rights violation. Then there is the hope of federal intervention. So that is actually what I was referring to. That did happen in Houston. The federal government came in, they paused the project, they told the state, you cannot proceed with this. While they did an investigation, because there was massive displacement happening to communities of color. And anyway, it was atrocious and the federal government stepped in. Now, what the outcome of that has been, people have different views on that. There were some compromises made. It's not what a lot of people hoped would happen as a result of that, but it was a major step that there was some federal intervention there. But what we've actually been seeing is that the local governments, even though in some sense they're at the mercy of the state, they actually have political power. And we've been told by a lot of people in the know that, you know, when the community stands up, when there's enough political pressure, when there's enough pressure from the local governments, that actually can change things. And so we've been actually seeing some great movement on that front here in Austin. In fact, we've got a really exciting resolution coming before City Council tomorrow that basically says the environmental impacts of this are unacceptable and something needs to change. So that's really exciting stuff. And then the last thing I want to mention, just because it's been of increasing interest, is our MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations. They're not something that a lot of us tend to think about all the time. But in a state like Texas, they're actually pretty important. So what these are regional bodies around a metropolitan area. So there's a metropolitan area, which includes Austin and the surrounding suburbs. There's a metropolitan area that includes Houston and the surrounding suburbs. And what's interesting about these is that the program is actually federally run and not state run. So these are basically regional bodies that funnel federal transportation money into cities. And so they actually are a local body that has the power to say, pause or stop funding for a project like this. And that kind of circumvents the state. Now, these bodies are also sometimes difficult to sway because historically, the major cities are highly underrepresented in these metropolitan planning organizations. So the last thing I want to talk about is something very exciting to my mind that's happening in Houston. So there's a proposition going on the ballot this November. And what the proposition says is this. It says that if the city of Houston doesn't get fair representation on their regional planning body, their MPO, then the city of Houston will withdraw from the MPO. And there is a federal law that says that if the largest city in an MPO withdraw, that MPO dissolves. So this is basically a way for the city of Houston to demand fair representation on their MPO. And that could really change things, because that would allow the city of Houston to have the votes they need to stop further freeway expansions in their city. So that was the last thing I wanted to mention about what's going on here. And I don't think I'll do this now for reasons of time, because I want to go to the Q&A, but I just wanted to flag, because I think it's really fun. You know, we've got someone in our group. There's been a lot of creative thinking and lots of all kinds of cool stuff happening in our group. And this guy, Shawn, he made this TikTok that went viral. You can look it up. It's called One Weekend in a City Built for Cars. And we got probably like more petition signatures and stuff than we ever got from this, you know, 60-second TikTok video, which was it's just really, really funny. So I'll just end with that note. It's, you know, one of the things, it's been so surprising and inspiring to see the way that you don't know how things are going to go. You don't know what's going to plant the seed. And lots of times it's, you know, just creative people from the community doing stuff that really, really can help turn the tide. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. So I'm going to ask some questions now, but for folks who are watching, if you have questions that you'd like to have asked, you should start putting them into the chat, please. So, you know, some fascinating stories here and inspiring stories, and maybe some losses also in addition to the inspiring wins. Can you speak a little bit about how you actually get people activated? Like, in order to make a difference, you need a lot of people on your side. What's been effective and what's gotten people really engaged? And whoever wants to start.
I would like to start on that. One thing that has activated people here is the learning and doing group. So what we do is that we gain the knowledge, the truth about what these freeways are doing. And once we gain that knowledge, then we war against the proud reasoning of man, which opposes the truth or the knowledge that we have gained. Now, this is really interesting because the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. What we're warned against is their reasonings. Why are you opposing the knowledge that we have gained about these freeways, and you don't want to hear the truth? So again, we have activated people through a learning, doing group.
Anyone else?
I'll hop in. I'll say that, you know, one thing that we found really activates people is creating environments where people are having a good time and building community and forming relationships. You know, when I first joined Rethink 35, one of the organizers said to me, "You're going to love it here. And even if you don't care a hoot about freeway expansions, you're going to want to stick around because we throw the best parties." And, you know, it's been kind of true. It's really become a space for people to gather. And then we gather and we do work together. So I think, you know, community and good times and good cheer and vibes. I mean, highways are depressing. Even like even thinking about highways is depressing. So really creating an environment that's positive, I think has been really important. The one other thing I'll add is that I feel like in Austin, at least, the main thing we're working against is not people that disagree with us, but people that feel hopeless, people that feel like there's nothing that can be done. It's a lost cause. And so much of it is really about bringing people hope. And, you know, people aren't dumb. So you need to show them that there are concrete strategies. You need to show them that there are paths forward to defeat something even as big and scary as the Texas Department of Transportation. So pointing to things like the lawsuit, you know, just showing that there is a ray of hope is really important for the purposes of activating people.
Thank you. Thank you both, Miriam and Dorothy. I'd like to talk about some of the things that we actually did. As we talked about Hinge, two opposite sides. There, with the neighborhood that's being reconnected, there's one side that is majority Black and brown, lower income, lower education. The other side are majority Caucasians, older, with wealth. And so my partner and I went out to both of these communities and told them, the highways going to get removed. When we went to the white neighborhood, they said, oh, no, that's terrible. How are we going to get to the airport? We figured that was some way that they just didn't want connectivity. We go to the other side, the Black and brown side, and say, hey, this highway is going to be removed. And they say, that is a terrible idea. How are we going to get to the mall? So we found common ground in this ground. So we knew that we wanted to get people activated and excited, or actually understanding what this means to their community. So some of those engagement points, as Miriam was saying, making things fun, making things interesting. So we started talking to the neighbors, getting them together. One of our points was to physically get them together. Folks who have not crossed this highway to speak to one another, would never take the opportunity to connect with one another. And we were able to get these folks together in educational settings, educational meetings, let's say, so that you can understand exactly what low density, high density means. You understand environmental issues. Let's bring it down to the ground and keep it real. Let's not talk too high, but also let's understand the language that designers and city officials and government officials are going to be using as well, so that when you enter the room, you are well educated, well versed, and you know what you want to say. Because most times when people are approaching an organization, a government entity, a consultancy group, they're most times they're coming in banging on the table about what I don't want. But what we've approached is, let's come with knowledge and information that says, I understand this is going to happen, but think about the child that has to run across the street or has to cross the street. We need more stops. We need this. This is where we can enhance our streets. So they come with not coming the force to hit, but with open hands to extend information, which then becomes a connection point for all. And we did this as well with the business sectors, with businesses as well, to get their input, employers in the neighborhoods as well, to say, hey, this benefits you. So we looked at all these sort of things. And some of the things we actually did was, and I'll go back to your point of fun, Miriam, as we realized if we're trying to get something from folks, we've got to give, we've got to give, we've got to give, we've got to give, and then we've got to give. So some of the things that I like to do, I'm a creative and an artist, is what I did. So what we did was we actually, in order to hook people, it's kind of a smoke and mirror trick. We did a community mural in the north side of the inner loop, the Black and brown side, to get people really thinking about it. So they see this recreation center that has been in their community for 100 years, now getting painted. It's a Lewis Street Center with Lewis Street Strong, and people are like, what are you doing? They're like, yeah, I can come and paint too. And people are excited to come paint this mural. All the while we're telling them, hey, this highway's getting filled that's in your backyard. I did not know that. So now we've rallied the troops, and they're like, oh my God, I'm all about this. And now they've got this piece, which is connected. We got people signing, people came from out of town. We got all these things happening. And once again, going back to our initial point of getting folks together, we got those two communities together to design a plan. They got educated together. They had an insight. These people are 500 feet away from each other and never would talk to one another. Now they're in the same room in the northern part of the inner loop, where most of these white cats would never go. But now they're there with the Black and brown people, dividing a plan, which then was submitted to the design team and to the city, stating, this is what we would like to see. When we presented this to the design team and the city, the folks said, hey, we never even thought about these connection points, which then made them go back to the grid as part of the plan. Once again, we affected the process, which shaped the plan. And once again, going back to your things of getting people excited, bringing people together, we actually closed off a bridge over the highway, and we had a celebration. We called it Live on the Loop. And what we had was all the various types of music and food that you would experience along this stretch of land, bringing these two communities together. We put grass on the bridge. We put fruit trees on the bridge. We did all these things to get people really thinking, to physically see what this would feel, how this would feel to be all living in this space, which has a highway that zooms underneath them, which then we like to call tactile engagement. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can see it. Now we've really got to push to move it forward. So these are some of the things that we've actually done in order to keep the momentum, because you can get burnt out and people get tired because, as you mentioned, you figure the city's going to do whatever they're going to do, but they're not. When you have the drive and you have your community champions as well. So you're hitting everyone from all fronts. It's not just one vehicle or one group. You've educated the masses, or for lack of better words, you are disciples to go spread the good news of highway removal and what it does for communities.
Yeah, super interesting stories. A couple of pieces of follow-up. So, Shawn, you talked about the local business community getting engaged. I'm curious for all of you, how is the business community engaged? Have they been supportive because they see smaller highways as allowing kind of more local business, or where have they come down? And the big metro area chambers of commerce, are they on your side, or are they taking the other position? How has that played out?
I will talk about some of the businesses in the area, some of them being a brewery, oldest brewery in New York State, Genesee, and another one being a wholesale building supply company. And there are other smaller businesses along the way that we've had the ability to connect with. Also, our transit system. So speaking with them about things. So I'll speak first about the transit system. When we had our meeting with them and the regional transit system and how to move buses around, they also felt that filling in of our inner loop was a terrible idea. They stated it would add a 7-minute commute to get north and south, east and west, and we didn't want that. It's terrible. But we try to infuse or educate them on the 7 minutes of a lifestyle that can be added, as Miriam and Dorothy talk about in future, when you can bring people together. So for 7 minutes while you're riding that transit system, you now recognize there's a laundromat, there's a bakery, there's a grocery shop, things you didn't see before. And we know that this happened, anecdotal stories that happened, here are some right now, when they began to fill that inner loop for 7 years, they're filling it with dirt. A lot of the businesses, as you would think, with traffic backed up and people trying to find their reroutes, businesses increased in florist shops and the breweries and various other things that we had, is because these people now had to be on ground level and they didn't see these things before. And so these retail businesses saw an increase. Going back to the larger companies who have to move big trucks and various other machinery throughout the neighborhood, some of their concerns were they don't want to be driving these big trucks down residential streets, and we may have to move our business and it may impede things, until that business actually came to one of those meetings that we had with both sides of our community. They realized, we don't give a damn if you drive the trucks through here. We see them all the time. We know that you actually employ people in the neighborhood. So let's make these things happen. So people are starting, once again, as we started to look at this second fill of what we're going to do, we realized there were economic benefits. We also have a racial and equity committee that actually looks at sort of the metrics of what's really going on and how do we actually build. We're looking at, with this construction, how do we reconnect communities and employ people to do the construction in the neighborhood? We've been working with Senator Gillibrand on that. There's a whole structure of things where people are understanding the benefits economically, emotionally, and reconnected community-wise that are a benefit to getting things happening. So businesses initially thought it might be a problem until you actually listen. Then they realize there's a benefit that will benefit them, get them more employees, and actually help to stabilize neighborhoods.
Thank you. Dorothy or Miriam, anything to add on this one, or?
I'll mention one thing. We're obviously in a very different situation from Buffalo right now. And here in Austin, there are several local businesses, some, much beloved businesses that are at threat of being destroyed and displaced because of the expanded highway. And engagement with them and around them has been interesting. In some sense, they're some of our greatest allies because obviously they don't want this to happen. But one of the things we've seen is that there are some scare tactics happening, and certain businesses that were kind of engaged with us and supportive of us have started saying, we can't really talk to you anymore. because there are negotiations happening with the Texas Department of Transportation, and clearly there is some vibe that if you want goodies from TxDOT in terms of relocation or anything else like that, you can't really stand up in opposition to the project. And so there are so many people that are scared because of this project, you know, people losing their homes, people losing their businesses, communities that are going to be impacted by worse air quality and childhood asthma and all of these issues. And I don't blame anybody who is scared for doing what they need to do to feel safer. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who are saying, look, we can't talk about this because, you know, we're just trying to get the best deal we can. But in a way, it's a shame because it's a strategic way of silencing people by and like limiting opposition to the project by cutting these corner deals on the side. So it's been very interesting to see how this has been developing.
So we're starting to get some questions from participants. So one question is, these projects must involve spending billions of dollars. How are you able to get people engaged and activated by talking about alternative uses for that money and other projects that they might like to see?
I can say something about that. So the short answer is yes. I mean, when you look, the highway expansion in Austin is supposed to cost about $5 billion. And you know, that's kind of just what the Texas Department of Transportation wants to put forward. The city is proposing various mitigation, but the city is supposed to pay for anything, basically the kinds of mitigation measures that are being proposed. And there's a lot of anger from people, especially in the city, that basically we have to use our tax dollars to kind of clean up TxDOT's mess. But, you know, I think the other way that the financial aspect of this can potentially play a role is at the state level overall. So, you know, we had a day where we were at the Capitol talking to representatives from different districts. And there were a lot of rural areas that really need transportation money for, like, their roads are crumbling and so forth. And, you know, we started having these conversations like, we don't want this money. Like, we'd be happy to hand it over to you. So can there be some kind of coordination between people in urban areas that are having projects shoved down their throat that they don't want, and people in rural areas who are begging for those transportation dollars? So, you know, that's not something, you know, we're not out in rural Texas much. Those conversations aren't happening all the time. But, you know, I think we need to start thinking a little bit outside of the box about ways we can find coordination and really make these kinds of movements a win-win-win for everybody.
I'd just like to add, I've talked about our proposed business boulevard that we've been trying to, you know, just talk about, introduce to our Louisiana Department of Transportation, our Northwest Louisiana, they don't want to hear it. But again, like I say, we just need the funds. I mean, $60 million to build a business boulevard, opposed to, which is going to be about $1 billion to build a freeway, you know, once they get done with the record of decision. So, you know, I think the business boulevard, if we could move on that, that would be a good tactic. You know, hey, while you guys are trying to figure out what you're going to do about this freeway, let's just move on the business boulevard and get that done. So, yeah.
I'll chime in on. I'm sorry, I'll keep it brief, but I'll say on our end, we've secured the funding, so it's now an issue of just go ahead. So we've completed the feasibility study. Now we're in the design phase. Okay, this is, you know, so we have the money to fill this thing in. So now let's go back to that plan and start designing the smaller pieces. And what's happening differently that hasn't happened is we're working the city is working with the design and land use at the same time. As you talk, Dorothy, about a business district, it's literally going to the neighborhoods and seeing, let's listen and find out what would actually happen, what things would actually benefit the communities, residential neighborhoods here, business districts, which then affects the zoning, how neighborhoods can grow. So we're thinking about a collective approach on how to re-stabilize and reconnect communities moving forward.
We've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to go to another question, as you can take about a minute each on this one. I think this is an important one, really, that goes to how you're able to do the work you're able to do. Can you talk a little bit about how your organizations build the time, money, and resources that are needed to maintain these campaigns? And are you all doing this sort of around the edges of having full-time jobs and other responsibilities, or have you been able to come up with resources to allow you to do this full-time? 1 minute each.
And we think we're all volunteers, and it's crazy. It's really there's a lot of dedication from a lot of people, but at the moment we don't have funding at this point to hire staff. So we are doing this at the edges of our full-time jobs. And we need to fundraise, and we don't have time to fundraise because we're all volunteers trying to stop this highway expansion. But that is, we are hoping to grow our capacity, and yeah, all of these movements, I think, need some more support.
Same here. We're a not-for-profit, just trying to squeak by and build our capacity as well. So we're really trying to make things happen, and our board helps support us. And what we realize is we become conveners of bringing people together, so that if we can give other groups information or movements forward, that helps in everything we're trying to do and get things going. But yes, we are operating on a shoestring budget. And I mean, like, not the fat Run DMC 1984 shoestrings. I'm talking thin dress shoestrings. Shoestring budget.
So what we're doing, we're collaborating with, we have a park called Swepco Park, and also we've started a food co-op. And even though we're a nonprofit organization, we do get maybe a very little funding from a people group. I'll just say it like that. But, with the food co-op and just learning about that, and with the Swepco Park, the collaboration is good, but we don't have like a team of people that we're really working with. And yes, some of this is like, for those who do work, working around to just try to get the funding that we need. So yeah, we're still trying, and I think it'll all come to pass.
So I would note one of the notes I'm seeing on chat right now is, wow, that's incredible. Kudos to all of you for doing what you're doing and your volunteerism. So these really have been some incredibly inspiring stories of communities coming together and really making a difference up against, in some cases, some really pretty significant opposition. So, very exciting to hear these stories. And thank you all for your participation in the panel this morning. And thanks to all the members of the audience. And I think we are now officially out of time.
Thank you all.